This program is sponsored in part by the National Catholic Society of Foresters. Hello again and welcome to Looking at Social Justice. I'm Jim Grant, and you may have listened to or seen a recent program that I just did with Kevin Hall. We really agitated. We talked about the situation of the world, and especially regarding the environment. And we began with the idea that to partly deal with something when you're having a conversation, you may want to begin with some agitation to become aware of what we're talking about. So Kevin and I did that, I think, adequately in our first program, but we've left off three elements of our continuing conversation about the political reality that we need to face here in the Valley. We need to do something to actually confront what is going on with our environment nationally, but also right here locally. So Kevin, as we begin our second program, what might you want to say about yourself that would let people know a little bit about why you're passionately committed to this issue that we've talked about already once and are now revisiting again, and why you want to tell us about the hope that it brings, the urgency of the moment, and the positive yes we can that is our response to the agitation we feel about the environment.
Well, I appreciate you using my structure, Jim. As I mentioned, as you mentioned in the intro to the first show, I spent part of my career as a community organizer and a political organizer for labor unions, and that came after 5 years of volunteer work on air pollution and climate change from '99 to end of 2004, and then I was drafted, you could say, by labor. And I learned a lot there. And one useful structure when having a conversation, either one-on-one or with a group, is called the AHUY structure, A-H-U-Y. And what I'm doing now is I'm trying to train my friends and anyone who's interested in how to have the necessary conversation about climate change. And so you agitate, number one, but then we have to give hope. We need to address the urgency and finish with yes we can, because we know we can get this done. So you and I in the first show of these two talked about the harsh news from the United Nations with the October report on the 1.5 centigrade increase in global average temperature projected. By the way, we're already 2/3 of the way there. And secondly, that the May report on the collapsing ecosystem and the mass die-off at a rate that's 10,000 times greater than normal. We're in the 6th great extinction. So given that very troubling news, is there hope? And there's a great deal of hope. And the best vehicle to describe it right now is the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal is at this point a resolution that has been introduced into the U.S. Congress and Senate by Representative Alexandria Ocasio Cortez from New York and Senator Markey of Massachusetts. And they have co-sponsored with many co-sponsors, including our own Senator Kamala Harris and others. I'm sorry, I don't know about Feinstein for sure, but maybe not. The point being nonetheless that the plan is this, and I'm sorry, I should accompany the Green New Deal with the Sunrise Movement and the Climate Justice Alliance. So this is not just all on a small group of legislators. There is a very active national movement that's occurring, and it's being led primarily by young people. But the Green New Deal itself is what you would expect it to be, right? The New Deal comes from FDR's New Deal. And why did we have a New Deal in our grandparents' generation or our parents' generation? If you don't know, go ask them. If you do know, go tell them. I really think that what we forget to do is pay attention to our elders and to ask people what they went through. I was able to ask my grandfather and my parents, you know, what was it like through these times and what was the response? And you know what's very interesting is the level of civic engagement, involvement, responsibility. U.S. citizens, all residents of this country stepped up in a very big way. So, but the policies that were put in place put people to work. We had mass unemployment. We have massive unemployment now, and they tell us we have near unemployment. Well, and people who are working know that the hidden truth is that, yeah, well, people are working 2 and 3 jobs. They're underpaid. All the indicators, other than the top economic indicators, are that people's lives have been worsening, at least getting no better on average for, again, the last 30 to 40 years. So the Green New Deal says, you've had it your way. We've tried the market-based systems since the Watergate Democrats came in and began deregulating, and then it took on a whole new, greater strength under the Reagan Republicans and really sealed the deal under the Clinton New Democrats. We have deregulated so many sectors of our economy that it has crushed the working and poor families in this country, and it's even worse beyond our borders, which is why so many are trying to escape their homeland. So where we are is a need to put people to work on the very things that will address climate change. We need to preserve natural landscapes, which means we need to treat our forests. They need treatment. They need hands-on intervention. And I'm not talking about massive amounts of logging. I'm talking about a very careful, considerate, manually intensive, and that's an important thing, you know. So much of our modern economy is built on automation and elimination of jobs, but so much of this work can't be done through that technique. To get to a clean energy economy, think of all the people we have to put to work manufacturing and installing all the types of alternative energy systems available. So the Green New Deal says we're going to move to that economy. It's only a resolution at this point. The political plan, and the Sunrise Movement lays this out. The political plan is to arrive at a majority of people in Washington, D.C., in both the Senate and the House of Representatives and in the White House, who agree that climate change is an existential threat. We must meet these deadlines, and in order to do so, we need to pass some laws. So the idea is to achieve those majorities in 2020, begin the legislation in 2021, and begin to get those policies in place that must be in place in, say, the next 5 to 6 years in order to achieve the deadline of 2010's 45% reduction. And not to mention, of course, 2050's deadline of 100% clean energy economy. So, the reason we know this can work is we saw it work here nearly a century ago with the New Deal. The New Deal had many flaws, its biggest being that it had some structural racism built right into it. It left many people out. So I'll put it another way. There's a parallel group. I describe it as the conscience of the climate change movement, and they're called the Climate Justice Alliance. And they have some very important principles, but they point out that a transition is going to occur, but will it be a just transition? Will there be justice in it? Or will the people who are already bearing the greatest share of the impacts bear even more? So their number one principle is reduce pollution at its source. And that sounds like a very obvious thing, quite logical, that of course we reduce pollution at its source, but we don't. No. We trade pollution credits. So as a resident of the San Joaquin Valley, Jim, as residents, you and I, have the distinct, as does anyone living in the valley, we have a distinct claim to some special knowledge. We can prove that cap and trade doesn't work and will not work for the world, because we have been trying through a cap and trade system for nearly 30 years to achieve clean air in the San Joaquin Valley. Under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1992, we put into place a cap and trade system for the pollutants that create ground level smog. Well, how's it working? All right, now imagine you have to do this worldwide in 11 years. Cap and trade won't work. And so what the Sunrise Movement says is no more market-based mechanisms. I'm sorry. The Climate Justice Alliance says no more market-based systems. You know, the Pope is right saying we have to put a price on carbon, and we have to go beyond that with significant tax reform as well. And what we have to avoid is any system that says, well, if we pay for it over here, we'll reduce it over there. That won't happen. And the biggest reason for that is, again, the Climate Justice Alliance is saying no more sacrifice zones. You know, our neighborhoods need to stop being the killing fields of high polluters. Come here where the pollution is occurring and reduce the pollution here. And that will be fair to the people around it. And put people to work. So, I'm sorry, the Green New Deal and the whole Climate Justice Alliance, that's how I wrap it into one.
No, that's great. And that was one of the principles that we wanted to look at, is the reduced emissions at the source, when you said, but we really don't. And one thing to just confirm that, we not only don't, this administration is digging in on trying to justify an industry like coal that at this point has nothing in its favor, that there is really the reason for the states that are dependent on it to be part of the great transition that they deserve, to move from what they've been enduring as their only way to eke out something. To think that we dig in and want to pretend that that principle of reducing emissions at its source is to deny that that's a source, which it is, and to keep bolstering up or supporting that failed industry. Why do we let that happen, Kevin?
This administration is either an anomaly that is going to be viewed as having been 4 years of a very, very strange episode, or it's the end of us all. I mean, frankly, we're at a constitutional crisis, and we're testing all our institutions of government as they've never been tested. Well, not since the Civil War have we seen them tested like this. But what you're bringing up is the urgency of the moment. What I ask people to do, and this kind of, I didn't quite get to it when you started this episode. I saved it. Is this? Do a little mental exercise. Think of when you were a kid, you probably had a grandparent or someone in that generation that you knew and loved. And I had my granddad, Tom McTaggart, a veteran of the Irish Republican Army. He fought in the rebellion.
Oh my!
He is my hero.
Oh wow!
And I have a few more, but he was born in 1888. All right. I have a niece. She was born 2 days ago, and we're thrilled. A grandniece. All right. She has a lifespan of a good 80 years. All right. So that takes her to the year 2100 and beyond. So between my grandfather and my grandniece, two people I love dearly, I am right in the middle of a time span of over 210 years. And, you know, the older I get, the longer that span becomes. So we should all think of ourselves as being right in the center of that 200-year and greater span of time, and ask ourselves, is it not in my interest to act quickly? My grandfather wasn't thinking of me then, but he acted in such a way. He risked everything, as did my father-in-law, who went off to war, 96 years old, still alive. And the bravery of people who put everything on the line is the courage that we need to find now, because those young ones are counting on us. And it's no longer a description of for the next generation. We are, given the amount of time humans have been in existence, we should think of ourselves as one generation right now. Everybody alive right now, I think, is in one generation. And as such, we need to act together, Jim, and we need to act in a hurry. So that's the urgency of the moment. And I give myself a feeling of urgency by thinking of the youngest person I love, and I think about what's the world going to look like for her if we don't act. What's the weather going to look like? This stuff does not stay static. Climate change, as you know, is locked in now through the end of this century and beyond. the amount of heat that is being held in the oceans alone, the amount of melting that has occurred and will continue occurring of the ice, regardless of what we do, means the weather changes are going to increase and continue. But they're not just achieving some new level of normal. What we're achieving is a stasis of, well, I don't know if that word is correct, a state of constant change that is going to continue to intensify. It's not going to remain stable. But we can stabilize it if we turn it now. We can stabilize it. I'm just saying that it's going to get worse through the end of the century, but we can stabilize it if we act according to these timelines, which the Pope has outlined, the United Nations has outlined, the Green New Deal is outlining, the people in U.S. Congress are outlining. It's all in place. And it's not a scientific problem. We know the problem. We have the science. It's not a technology problem. We actually have the technology, okay? It's just a political problem. And that takes us to the final section of our talk.
Before we go to the final section, I've got something on urgency from Pope Francis not 4 years ago, 3 weeks ago. This would be on the 14th of June. And here's what the Pope said in this statement at that meeting that I referenced in the first program on the theme of the energy transition and care for our common home. It was a meeting that Cardinal Peter Turkson, who visited our diocese in 2018 and visited and gave us a major presentation on the Pope's encyclical at Holy Spirit Parish. But it was Cardinal who organized this worldwide meeting, but the Pope addressed it with a keynote. Here's what the Pope said about the urgency. It's just what you said, but the Pope saying it. In effect, it is the poor who suffer the worst impacts of climate crisis. As current situations demonstrate, the poor are those most vulnerable to hurricanes, droughts, floods, and other extreme climatic events. Courage is surely required, therefore, in responding to the increasing desperate cries of the earth and the poor. At the same time, future generations stand to inherit a greatly spoiled world. Our children, our grandchildren, should not have to pay for the cost of our generation's irresponsibility. I beg your pardon, but I would like to emphasize this. They, our children and grandchildren, should not have to pay. It is not right that they should pay the price of our saying, the future is ours. They are being the victims. Our future, I'm more interested, actually, as you said, in those that are going to follow me than necessarily those that preceded. Peggy and I just have our first grandchild. The 26th of June, Jillian Moira Grant became our legacy going forward, and we are so aware of the diminished world that Jillian's going to inherit, that she has already inherited. She lives in the valley. She's going to be breathing this air. She's going to be knowing all the challenges that are part of being a Fresno resident. So I join you in the urgency of doing something about it. And I guess you did want to tell us, but there's also a why. There's a yes, we can. So go to it.
Well, I think there's any number of ways to tackle the problem, Jim, and depends on what one's interest is and abilities in terms of both physical ability, time, finance. But I think the very first thing to think about is incorporating this into our lives right away. So that if, for example, you're already involved in a civic organization, or you are you're working in an office place, or you're especially if you're working in government, every agency needs to start talking, and every entity needs to start thinking and talking about how they're going to transition their building off of natural gas. It is one of the biggest things that's coming is we have to electrify everything. We have to electrify our buildings. And I'm not talking about people spending and worrying about taking care and going to great expense on their own individual piece of property. I'm talking about systemic changes. So if you're active in these organizations, if you go to school board meetings, if you're on a PTA, we need to start talking about climate change with the people around us. And I am happy to come talk to any group about how to talk about this. And this is what I'm trying to create here is a structured conversation that we can all have. So number one is your own existing lifestyles and forms of voluntary or participation or employment. Look for ways to incorporate it into that, because that's the easiest thing to do, but it's also the most immediate. But not about, okay, we'll make sure we're all recycling here and chasing down trash cans, all right? You have limited time and you got to go for the big targets. The big targets are the policies that affect entire systems. So who's doing that most? Well, I really like the Sunrise Movement. Now they're led by young people, and it's really designed for young people to participate in. So what older people can do is learn to have this conversation, and don't be afraid to have it with young people. Have it with people as young as middle school. They need to know. When I go around and give my talks and I ask people, if you were asked to explain the impacts of the October UN report, would you feel comfortable doing that? 1 in 100 so far. I'm counting. I've had one person raise his hand.
Wow.
So we don't know about it. So we need to talk about it with each other, be comfortable talking about it. We don't have to be experts. 1 or 2 good articles and you'll get it. And it's easy to find. And the Sunrise Movement, young people have been taking a series of actions. Everybody running for Congress of any party is being asked to support the Green New Deal. They're demanding that the Democratic Party will be having presidential candidate debates. The Republicans won't, of course, they have an incumbent. And so they've been doing hashtag change of the debate. Well, now they are talking about climate change, but not enough. So they're demanding a climate change debate.
That's right.
All right? So in August of 2019 is the second Democratic presidential debate. And the Sunrise Movement plan is to swarm it, demanding this. Additionally, the Democratic National Committee meets in August of 2019, and they're organizing people to pressure those committee members to vote to have a climate change debate. The last presidential debates, there were no questions just 4 years ago about climate change. It's insanity, but they're remedying it. And the energy of youth is unmistakable, and the passion. They're also doing a school climate strike, or strike for climate. This began in Europe, but it's spread to the US. But Greta Thunberg, people should go on YouTube and look for her. I'm sure most everyone's heard of her now.
The
But
Pope met with her. He loves her. He says,
did.
oh, you are my
Right.
inspiration. 16 years old.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yes.
Amazing what people can do who get engaged.
And what she did back in September, she got her parents to agree. She wanted to go on strike from school. She said, why am I going to school when I don't have time to learn and apply the things that need to be learned and applied to save the planet? I don't have time as a 16-year-old. If we have only 12 years, when she first, in responding to, now it's 11, education does her no good. How's that for a reality check? So they agreed she could strike on Fridays. So all by herself, she began sitting out front of the Swedish parliament. It exploded into a worldwide movement. She's online for a Nobel Peace Prize. She's already had all these, as you said, she got to meet with the Pope. She's inspired so many people. She inspires me. She has clarity. So people should look to her, listen to what she says. The clarity is there. There are also in local campaigns in Fresno and in every community. Now, many of these organizations organize within specific communities because they are trying to work in these most impacted areas. Others, like Faith in the Valley, for example, is one that has a number of parishes and congregations that are involved through their social justice committees. And I know a number of those groups are working on air pollution and climate change in combination. So people can check with their churches as well. And then, of course, there are the major environmental organizations are running a number of campaigns. All of them are, and the key is, do you want to take direct action where I'm going to go hold up a sign in the street, I'm going to be peaceful. It's always peaceful, but I am going to be physically present. Or do I want to be doing a policy campaign where we're working in a coordinated small group and creating committees and that. So the Sierra Club, for example, is one that has that option locally. You can go and join their committees on air pollution and climate change. And there's a local group, Californians Against Fracking, all right? That is a group that is taking direct action. The challenge when you participate in these groups is that, is it frequent enough for you? Do you get to do enough to satisfy that anxiety that is making you so worried now? And for me, it's not. What I'm sorry, I should pause here and just check in with you. How are we doing time-wise?
We've got 2 minutes.
I had a feeling I was blabbing on too
long.
No,
you're doing fine. 2 minutes
All right.
is awesome.
Well, I have a website. It's valleyclimate.org, and I do a radio show called Climate Politics, and it's on KFCF 88.1 FM on the second and fourth Fridays of every month from 5 to 6 p.m. I'm on Twitter as Air Fresno with a Z, Air Fresno, as well as, well, we'll just stick with that one. If people want to chase me down, they can find me there. I think what I really want to emphasize is that I share the Pope's optimism and sense of resolve and urgency. I think that there is no greater issue, but it is not the only issue. And that all of the issues that people are working on now, they need to keep working on. They're all related. They're all now in a context of climate change. And as we develop better systems for housing people and for feeding people, for meeting their basic needs, for refugees and immigrants, all of those crises are going to worsen as climate change worsens. However, they can all get better as we address climate change, as we restructure our economy in such a way that we can both put people to work and address the needs of those who can't work and deal with what's really going to be an increasingly large refugee crisis. Many parts of the highlands of Central America and Mexico are becoming unlivable in that subsistence farmers can't grow enough food to make it through the year. They are forced to leave by the weather changes, the droughts, and worse. So that's where we get into the deep articles of faith of what are we really about on this planet? How do we really want to be, and how would we want to be treated?
Thank you, Kevin, for sharing 2 programs with us. We will have you back to talk about more issues about the environment, the interconnected quality of all of the issues we are confronted with. Till next time, I'm Jim Grant. God bless.